you had a career in tech, reached COO level at Hyper, then VP of product at Fortech. You're a co-founder at a startup, and for almost 3 years managing partner at Fortech Investments. Tell us more about this path.
Sure. So happy to share about it. I started as an engineer. So actually, I got hired or tried to get hired and accomplished it with 1 month prior to going into the university. So I was eager to start working. And with this, also the eagerness to get involved in a lot of projects, ideas, and to collaborate with other people. So this basically brought me from being a sole contributor to trying to have impact through others. So basically this gave me the opportunity to become first a developer, then a team lead, then a leader inside the company that I first started in, and then of course try to get involved in other activities and other companies. And with Hyper, for instance, I got the opportunity to have impact in 120 startups while I was the CEO there with the team that I had. And after that, with the collaboration with Fortech, creating new products, having new ideas that can fail or have success. We're still searching for the success. But through the experience in Fortech Investments now, I can have impact and the, let's say, close collaboration with a lot of companies, which gives me a lot of joy.
Because you started as a developer and a lot of startups have this component. The founders are developers. What have you learned in this path of yours from a developer to being involved in management teams that can be useful also for startups today?
I believe developers need to realize that they cannot build products by themselves. So regardless of the fact that they can build the best product, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best product for the market. So for this, collaboration between developers and other disciplines, other people with other backgrounds, is the key component for success. And we're trying to promote this as much as possible individually, myself and also us as Fortech Investments, towards educators, towards university professors, such that they put people earlier on together to create value and to identify problems from other fields as well.
You were at first a vice president of product at Fortech. How did that happen? What attracted you to Fortech? And how was the path to your position today?
So a lot of services companies are looking for the path toward creating products. I think this is something that, at least in Romania, but I'm sure in other countries, has been the path that companies are trying to go through. And it's not an easy path, because if you're starting something from scratch, it's very difficult to set aside the experience and the success that you've had in services. So that works at individual level, but also at a company level. So from this perspective, I tried doing this in 2 companies. So in my first company that I was employed, and I shared the experience there, there is where I started with this initiative to transform a services team, at least, towards a product team. And in Fortech, I was very glad to find even more commitment from the shareholders towards this goal. So basically, as opposed to the traditional way of just doing this with people that are on the bench, that are not providing revenues towards the company, in Fortech, I found the willingness to actually dedicate funds towards this with the purpose of achieving this result. So not doing it half-assed, to be straightforward, but to be actually dedicated. And this is something that drew me towards Fortech, and it was something that we agreed on from the beginning. And this also gave us the possibility to reach, for instance, Fortech Products, which is that portion of the intent. Right now has almost 40 people working in this direction. So from that perspective, it's a huge commitment, because it means, of course, a lot of cost. And with the intent of creating new products, new startups. because as a business model, it's created as a startup studio. So its intent is to create spin-offs / startups. And based on, let's say, the starting points that I had in this team, the shareholders really appreciated the way of organizing, of creating the vision, of putting things into practice. And with that, they said, okay, we've been doing some investments for the past 7-8 years. They had at that point around 13 investments done, mainly in the States, but they were not very well managed. They were not researched before agreeing to invest and so on. They were mainly in customers that wanted the support of Fortech, and they wanted to do that as a dev for equity type of deal. But it wasn't a portfolio. It didn't have a vision, it didn't have an intent, a thesis, and any other word that we know from this environment. So I agreed with the shareholders to take over this effort, to do it in an organized manner, to do it with a team, to analyze the domain that the startup was in, the competition landscape, and basically propose investments that they would agree also on investing, and in the end creating a portfolio for our team.
This was before or after Fortech was sold to an American company? Was it a strategy before also?
Yes, so we actually started discussing it in 2019. Then is where we created the first team for the product side, and around 2020 we started discussing the investment side, and in 2021 we actually began the actual effort in this direction. And of course the company got sold at the end of last year, beginning of this year. So right now the services company is owned, exactly as you said, by a Silicon Valley company. So Silicon Valley has come to Cluj. We don't need to create Silicon Valley there. Global Logic owns right now Fortech, the services company, and Fortech Investments and Fortech Products are owned by the initial shareholders.
How hard is it? Because this is a story of this ecosystem and maybe of the region. We built services companies because we had the skills to do it, but we lacked the force, the inspiration of building products in the 90s, in the early 2000s. How hard is to shift a company, which can be a big ship, into the direction of products and do it good, not just as a PR move, we're going to build some products and then nothing happens.
Yeah, so I think that's a trap and it's easily taken. I would say that, first of all, even moving a person from services to product is very difficult. So when we're thinking of a company, there are a lot of moving parts and everyone is set into their own pace and rhythm and intent. We actually took a portion of the company and dedicated it towards this product endeavor. And to be honest, even taking one individual and making them used to a different way of thinking, to a different way of relating to what they have to build has been a difficult task. So we had situations where we had to have difficult conversations to say, okay, this is not the intent. We want to build something that is fast now and well done later, because everyone in services is used to providing a high-level service, which means creating something that will last. When we're talking about products, usually it's very good to do something that can be thrown away easily and then build the long-lasting thing. So this is a very difficult change of mindset, and it starts from the individual. And for this, I think it's important to have great leaders. So it's important to be able to have those difficult conversations. It's important to be able to motivate people, because when you're saying that they're not doing the things the way you're thinking of them having to be done, you're basically demotivating them. So at the same time, you have to motivate them on the flip side and tell them that if they do the change, it's going to be a very, very different scenario for them, for the company, and for the impact that they can create in the economy, in the life of other people, and in their own pocket at the end of the day.
So in 2021, Fortech Investments was born as it is today. And you mentioned that you built a thesis, you put the right steps in order to build a corporate VC fund. So what's the thesis and what's the vision of Fortech Investments?
So at the beginning, of course, exactly as you said, the CVC was the starting point because we were directly connected with Fortech at that time. So the idea was to create something that would give us the possibility to create, let's say, a small empire that can have three main pillars. The idea of having investments, which gave us the possibility of understanding even better some domains and having connections in those domains, which gave us the possibility later to create new products for those domains, so new products that were not in our portfolio of investment, and for those products to be able to provide services that can incorporate those products in the whole business cycle of the customers. So this was the initial vision with the three pillars that basically fed each other, because the services company was providing the funds for the investment arm, the product side was creating new products, and services then could complement, at least a portion of the business, of course, complement the product side. So this was the starting idea, and for this we wanted to invest in domains that were familiar to us, to be able to actually evaluate the startups, to be able to know which are the actors in those domains and how they interact with each other. A good portion of these things have stayed because the people that are part of this endeavor are the same. The only portion that has been left behind or is now on a different path is the services side, which doesn't provide the funding anymore and also doesn't have the connection and implication in the rest of the vision. What we're trying to do is to invest in early stage startups. So early stage, I would go to at least from early seed to late seed. Of course, as the fund develops, we cannot invest so much in the early seed because we need time to the window of opportunity shrinks and we need to have enough time to actually exit from the investments. But apart from this, we still want to invest in domains such as healthcare, manufacturing, finance, automotive, energy, and others. So we're always open to other opportunities. We invest in startups that have already some revenues. So the idea of some traction that can demonstrate the fact that they have a product market fit to some extent. And with the ability of investing everywhere, because we only have private funding, then the restrictions on the area that we invest and so on are very limited. So we have a lot of openness and opportunity, basically.
Tell us more about your portfolio right now. You mentioned the industries and verticals you are looking at.
So one important thing for our portfolio building is the idea of having complementary startups in our portfolio, because I believe in the idea of compounding. And to achieve this, we need startups that can help each other basically grow and promote each other. So this is what we're trying to do. So we have startups that have begun collaborations, for instance, from manufacturing with computer vision. We have different sets of complementarities from this perspective. We indeed are open to other domains. So if we're looking at the map of our investments, they don't all fall in these domains that I mentioned. So we have others as well. So we have startups in automotive, in healthcare, in e-commerce, something that is more in the area of infrastructure rather than e-commerce itself. We have computer vision, as I mentioned. So it's relatively diverse. We're at 15 startups at the moment. we're intending of finalizing the year with 17 or 18, so we're working hard at that. And our intent is to reach around 25 startups by the end of next year.
You mentioned that you have only private funding. What's the advantage of having such a fund here in Romania? Because there are some that are fully private, some have this mix of funds from the European Investment Fund that are completed with money from investors. How is it to have a fully private fund?
I consider it to be an advantage to some extent. The main difference that is given between only private funding and a combination with institutional funding, I would call it, is the scale of the fund. Usually, getting money from such an outside investor gives you the possibility of having a larger fund in the end, which is an advantage in some situations. But those are relatively limited when you actually need that, because otherwise you have many more advantages in the idea of just being privately funded, because it gives you a lot more flexibility. Of course, you still have to adhere to the thesis, you still have to have a common agreement with the LPs or the financiers of this fund when deciding on investments, but it gives you flexibility on region, it gives you flexibility on the domains, it gives you flexibility when it comes to the tickets, it gives you flexibility when it comes to the number of investments that you do, and also to a certain extent it might give you an advantage in terms of the value that you can provide towards the startups. Because, for instance, something that we're trying to do, I'm not saying that we're doing it perfectly, but we're trying to take the experience from our shareholders and translate it to the startups. And this is something that you usually don't do that much when you have a fund that is actually a venture fund with limited partners that don't necessarily get involved in the activity of the fund and so on. So our shareholders are involved in the decision to invest, and then I'm trying to leverage their experience such that we help the startups as well.
Talking about experience, because in your portfolio you have startups that are founded by, I don't know, 40 plus, 50 plus years founders, and also younger founders. So what's the difference in working with these startups, if there is a difference? Because we usually see startups as these endeavors founded by 20-something people, but usually the ones that make it are the ones founded by more mature people with more experience.
And I fully support that. So I definitely think that education and familiarity and intent should be shared as early as possible with all people. So you cannot expect somebody at 35, 45 plus to do a big shift towards a new endeavor if they have not been in contact with this shift previously. So I believe in high schools, even earlier, but let's say as a reasonable term, in high schools, in university, in the beginnings of their careers, they should have a connection and a familiarity with entrepreneurship. At the same time, I fully support the idea that the startups with most chances of becoming successful are the ones that are done with people that are 35 plus. Why? Because they have life experience, so they know how to handle an environment of business. They have domain expertise that they gathered. They have maybe some expertise in managing teams. They have expertise in managing a budget and creating a business plan, the real one, not the one that they just showcase to show a J curve that nobody believes in this day and age. They have a network, and also at the same time they have some money to start with. So this is a very important aspect, because the difference between a youngster that is willing to trade their time with, so basically invest their time in their startup, and the person with 35 plus with some funds, is that the youngster will use other youngsters to create the product and to define it, while the 35 plus person will use people with experience to create that product, which is going to have a very different outcome.
You mentioned this thing you are trying to implement of collaboration, basically between the startups in your portfolio with people from the investment funds, with the people you know. How does this relationship work, and maybe how it should work, basically, to make it useful also for the startups, to create value, and put these experiences together?
So I believe there are different types of collaboration that can have different incentives. For instance, if it's somebody from our fund, the incentive is already there because they are basically investors in that startup. So they have an intrinsic motivation to help that startup. So that already exists. And from this perspective, I think the hardest part is for these people to make time. So this is a very difficult target to achieve. And also at the same time to have enough knowledge of the startup to be able to accurately promote it to the exact people that should come in contact with the startup. Usually the difficult side of this is the trust that they put on the line. So let's say our shareholders, if they were to introduce somebody to a high stake corporate that would utilize or interact at least with a startup. So basically between these people there is a high level of trust that was built through years, and right now they would be in a position to introduce somebody that has something that is half built, maybe it doesn't work that well. So putting that on the line can be a very difficult endeavor to take. So for this, I believe the connection between these parties needs to be strong to have that trust in this scenario as well, to put the trust of the target on the line. So this would be the scenario where we have somebody that is part of the fund. At the same time, there is a lot of experience in the market. And there are a lot of people that could help startups. And from that perspective, I believe some advisory is something that can definitely create this interaction between startups and people with experience, with networks, with ways to help the startup. And there, the intent of the founders to actually find an advisor that is actually going to work, I think that's a very important endeavor. So I've seen a lot of founders that have put a lot of pictures and names on slide decks, but there's never any interaction between that founder and that advisor. So being truthful about what we're doing, what's our intent, and actually trying to generate this interaction with people that can have an impact in the startup, I believe this is an important step and way to achieve a better outcome for the startup.
How would you describe, from your interactions with the founders, how would you describe their openness to feedback and to change, those you have interacted and those in this region, in this country?
I would say the landscape is very broad, and there is people that are set in their mind, and even if they say that they listen, or if they try to generate this perception that they listen, they're still going to continue on their path, and regardless if that's a good path or not, or if it shows to be a good path or not later on, they're glad that they kept true to themselves. At the same time, I would say that a lot of people are open towards feedback. One aspect maybe that can be improved is making sure that there is a constant communication to be able to receive feedback. So I've seen a lot of interaction where the interaction is sporadical, it's not necessarily organized, so it just happens at the coffee, we stay and we discuss a little bit. If it's unstructured, the impact that that conversation can have is limited. If it's made sure that it's organized, if it's regular, then this translates usually easier into action. So from this perspective, I would say even starting from the openness to receive feedback, the way that you make sure you receive feedback is also an important step.
And going to a macro level about collaboration, how would you describe your collaboration with other funds, with other investors in Romania, maybe in the region? Because usually rounds are not with one investor only, but a collaboration between funds. How would you describe this collaboration, and maybe how would you improve the collaboration here in the country between investors?
We most of the time don't invest by ourselves. So this is something that we started with from the get-go. We have one or two exceptions, so we try to keep it that way. So there are exceptions. And the rest of the time we invested with others. This happens also because, exactly as you said, usually investors don't cover the entire round, so they kind of feel obligated to introduce the founders to other investors as well. And also because we have done a collaboration and we want to repeat that, because the interaction that we have afterwards with the startup and amongst ourselves is a good one. I truly believe in this collaboration because it's very important to take the best of everyone available to improve the outcome of the startup. We have a background in engineering, so usually funds call us when they have a startup that actually is trying to build the product. So not necessarily just something that interacts with the database, inputs and reads from the database, because there are a lot of products like that as well. But when they are trying to create something that is more technically challenged, they usually call us. This is something where we, for instance, have a very good impact when it comes to the technical due diligence. So understanding first the product, then evaluating it from how it has been built, and also the way that we can help afterwards in the interaction with the startup. So this is something that usually differentiates us from other investors, apart from, for instance, having private money. And also at the same time, the idea that we are a fund that has a good portion of the fund dedicated towards follow-ons. So this is something that we are very intent about it. So from this perspective as well, we're not a fund, and I've heard this a few times recently, so that's the only reason I'm mentioning it, because we're not a fund that's only going to invest the first time and then not reinvest in the startup if it's a good one, of course. So I know that most of the funds have this proposition, but it seems that a lot of the startups believe differently. So from that perspective, for instance, this year, most of our investments are follow-ons, so we truly walk the talk, to say the least.
You mentioned your technical skills that are an advantage when talking to other funds and when talking to startups. And in your opinion, because we see this on the market, startups, waves of startups, of hypes that appear. What separates a good startup from a nice to have one?
So,
even if we in Romania, we don't build too many B2C nice to have startups.
Yes, even in B2B, we can create nice to haves. So from this perspective, this is why I was saying earlier that the collaboration between software engineers and people from other sectors is very important, because if there is this collaboration, the chances of creating a nice to have are lower. It doesn't mean it's zero, but they are lower. So from this perspective, I believe the way that the problem has been identified is an important factor in making the difference between a nice to have and a must have. So that's why we put a lot of emphasis in discussing the way that the startup has reached the idea that they need to build this product, and also who in the team is the closest towards the environment that they're trying to affect, to interact with. So this is an effort that we're doing in order to identify a good startup. Also, at the same time, I would say that one important aspect when we become interested in investing is the level of interaction that the startup has with its customer base. So if the only interaction that they have are NDAs to discuss a potential collaboration, we cannot be sure that this is something that will actually have legs. So from that perspective, if they have already at least had some letters of intent that have details about how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take to implement, when is it going to be in production, at least these things, then the conversation is one that is valuable. If they have revenues already, it's even better.
What do we need in the country in order to have more funds for startups? And do we need more funds right now?
I actually had a conversation recently where the question was, what do we need first? Do we need talent or do we need capital? And the idea is that each of them influences the other. Also at the same time, usually capital attracts talent and is able to generate it in terms of education and creating the environment in which talent can be comfortable with the idea of risk. So if we don't have capital, the risk component is going to be subdued by the fact that we all have basic needs. So then it's very difficult to get out of this. Of course, there are illuminated people that are very ambitious people, but the chances of having this as a national environment where we flourish are slimmer when we don't deploy capital. So I definitely believe that it's very important to have as much capital available here as well as possible. It's very important at the same time to make sure that we understand how we deploy it and to make it intentional. So there is this spray and pray, let's say, way of investing and of utilizing funds. I don't think Europe is that type of environment. So from this perspective, even if we're talking of deploying capital in terms of educating the market, in terms of attracting new people and so on, that way of doing it is not going to be beneficial for us. So if we have an intent, if we know what we're trying to build, if the actions are coordinated. So for instance, right now there is push for creating incubators, which is very good. And if everybody knows about each of the other initiatives in this direction, and they collaborate and complement each other, so they don't interact in terms of going after the same people, then the possibility of having a great outcome is even higher. So I believe collaboration in terms of complementation, exactly as I was saying, we go in terms of software engineering background to complement the other investors, not necessarily compete with them. The same happens here when we're trying to build the ecosystem such that we have in what to invest.
We see a lot of, not lately, but we see investments from Romanian funds and angels in Romanian startups. We see less investments from funds from Romania in startups, even from the region.
Mm-hmm.
But we see funds from abroad, from Hungary, from Bulgaria, Poland, coming and investing in rounds in Romanian startups. What's lacking, and would this be a good strategy, and how would we implement it to attract more startups from abroad through Romanian funds?
I'm very happy to be able to say that we have investments from Romania to the States with Fortech Investments. So we basically have invested, of course, at the beginning in Romania with this new fund when it got officially created. We then invested in Estonia, in Bulgaria, in the UK, in Ireland, in the States as well. Now we're going to have a new one that just came out of How to Web. So this is going to complete the landscape. So from this perspective, I truly believe that being able to invest outside of the country is a very important step because it gives us the connection with that ecosystem. So it gives us the possibility of interacting with other investors. It gives us the possibility to see how a startup that has more educated people, let's say, in this environment behaves, and then try to bring all those learnings here as well. So we have this phenomenon of brain drain. So basically what we know better goes in other places, but we have to see how we can capture value from other places and bring it to Romania as well. So our intent is to do that with the way that we allocate our funds. I know that there is some limitation because of institutional funding for a good portion of the funds that we have here in Romania. So from this perspective, I think it would be beneficial to see if we can alter that in any way. So having at least conversations with the IF and other means of funding the funds to see if we can make the case basically for what I just exemplified. And also at the same time, try to create more and more funds privately funded, because recently I had a conversation with an investor from the States. He was here for an event, and I asked, do you have any schemes in the States where you can get funding for your fund to supplement basically the funding that you're able to attract by yourself? And the answer was no. Of course, it's very different because there the culture of venture capital is a deep one and a long-lasting one. So we need to aspire and develop in that direction. At the same time, if we don't have the intent to get there, we're not going to get there. So I believe it's important to realize that this is a very, very attractive proposition to be able to be connected, not necessarily just by networking and so on, but actually by working with people in that environment and bringing knowledge here to create more value that then can go there and be sold with a lot of money.
For some years, maybe until the UiPath IPO and UiPath becoming a unicorn, if you take, I don't know, the top 50 most wealthy people in Romania, you would see there people not from the tech or IT industry. How do you attract such people in investing in startups, in coming as an LP to Fortech Investment or any other fund, or maybe starting a fund? How do you attract them? Because usually the money flows in the IT industry, but there's a lot of money outside of it.
Exactly, I fully agree with that, and I believe the path between the experience that they have towards becoming an LP is a very long one, and the transition from one extreme to the other, I believe, is very difficult to happen in a very short time. So for that, first step can be becoming aware of the dynamics of this environment. For instance, Growceanu or Tech Angels or Transylvania Angel Networks, these are ecosystems that can attract people with experience, with money, with the intent of diversifying their portfolio, and also maybe giving back towards the community and connecting with a new domain that can actually impact their industry as well. So I believe a first step is them being able to invest in startups that are going to improve the domain that they are coming from, because they will be able to analyze that startup, they will be able to say if implementing such a startup in that domain is possible, and at the same time they will be able to help that startup. So they will be able to create enough connections for the startup for them to be successful. So then the chances of their investment being a good one are much higher, so that they don't have an initial drawback, an initial step back from doing these investments. If the first thing that they do fails, the chances of them going further are very slim. So the intent is, of course, to improve the chances of them being successful with this. And I believe a first step is becoming an angel investor where they feel as they are in control, which is something that they are used to. When they become an LP, they are nowhere near control. So these are extremes. We need to take small steps, and it's important to be aware of this, because otherwise we won't be able to attract these people, and they are many and they have a lot of money that can have a lot of impact.
Indeed. Talking a bit about the ecosystem in Cluj-Napoca, how do you see it right now in 2023? Where it's going and what's still lacking there?
I believe Cluj and Transylvania in general are ecosystems that are relatively mature when it comes to looking at issues and trying to identify solutions. So from that perspective, the background of Transylvania and Cluj in more particular way is the collaboration with parties from outside the country. So being able to do services basically gives us an openness towards attracting information and trying to come up with something to do about it. This is very good. At the same time, I believe there are more and more people that are trying to get involved in this ecosystem, in this startup mentality, in this funding mentality, and so on. So from that perspective as well, I think this is a good starting point, and we were rememorating these days when Startup Weekend, for instance, first started in Cluj, and it was 2012 or 13, something like this. So we have 10 years right now when things have happened and the ecosystem has started growing. We have quite a few startups, we have quite a few companies that are trying to build products, so not necessarily as a startup initiative, but more concrete, with people that are convinced that they want to build that product and they finance it themselves. So this is again good. Of course, at the end of the day, it's a small ecosystem. We cannot compete in size, let's say, with Bucharest, for instance. But in terms of proportion there, I think it's a good start. What's still lacking is the collaboration between all the people that are trying to do something and all the people that would need solutions for their problems. So for this reason, for instance, in Cluj, there is an initiative called Manifesto, the Manifest for Innovation, which gathers a lot of people from different domains, from the university, from business, from startups, from investment. And we're trying to generate collaboration where, for instance, if a new founder wants to validate or wants to test their solution, they have firsthand where to go and do this. So living labs on one hand, which is something that is more officially created, but also collaborations with companies that are open to welcome startups and new solutions, which is something that I believe is going to be more and more important for us to be able to further nurture this ecosystem.
And this initiative is a private one launched by the people in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so it's all, let's say, the effort of people that are there and want to do something about the ecosystem, and we create connections with bodies in the city and not only, to be able to facilitate this interaction.
Do you see a need for more collaboration also between ecosystem in different cities? Because sometimes Cluj is an island, Bucharest is an island, maybe you have a big hub at Piatra Neam, something in Oradea, something in Timișoara, and that's that. How do you make this a real network?
Collaboration is the key in any endeavor to succeed. I'm very happy to be able to go to different events organized by these hubs and networks, and to see that they are visiting each other and they're participating to the other's event, which is great because it means that at least the environment for collaboration seems to be there. When it comes to the way that the collaboration happens, I believe still that finding your niche should be the same in terms of the hubs or networks, and complementing with the other hubs and networks is something that is very valuable. So if we can achieve this, nobody is going to step on anyone's toes, and everyone will be able to contribute to the success of the whole.
Where do you think we are right now in Romania in terms of the startup ecosystem? What's next for us?
I believe we're at a crossroad because we're at that stage where we can either go big or go home. If we go big, we're not going to do it by ourselves, and this is why I am fully aware of so many investors that are looking towards Romania. So if this is happening, we have the premises of a good ecosystem, something that has a good basis and can be developed. And hopefully, with our effort and with the help of others as well, we're gonna do that. In terms of the risk, we have the risk of not capitalizing right now on the people with experience. So supporting people 35 plus with experience, with domain knowledge, is something that is going to make our ecosystem flourish, because otherwise we're going to still stay at that level where we're trying to incentivize students to come into the startup environment, and there's going to be a lot of effort but not necessarily progress. So there's a quote that I like: don't mistake movement with progress.
And what do you think our role from a regional perspective as a country can be? Because, okay, we're not going to be leaders of Europe. That's for sure. But maybe almost philosophically, what can be Romania?
I'm even challenging a bit the idea that we cannot be leaders of Europe, because this is the trap that I have found in services as well. So it's very easy to have a competition on cost, but at a certain point, you're not able to support that competition anymore. So if we're looking at services in Romania, we're pretty expensive. So from that perspective, if we don't reinvent ourselves and try to provide better value for the money that we're asking, we're going to be considered very expensive, and everything is going to move somewhere else where the workforce is going to be less expensive. So in terms of a startup ecosystem, a product ecosystem, I believe it's important for us to identify where we can be good at and to see if we can differentiate ourselves from the rest of Europe and from the rest of the world. To be honest, I don't know exactly where we're best at as a country and as experience in terms of the domains that we have worked in, let's say, regionally. At the same time, I would say that we should capitalize on our experience. So for instance, we have been an industrial country. So we had a lot of factories, and we still have a lot of factories, but we don't serve Romania that much with those factories, because we are exporting a lot, which is good because we're creating value, but at the same time, I believe we're not creating enough value there. So we still export a lot of commodities. Let's see if we could innovate in this direction and utilize technology to innovate. At the same time, agriculture has been something in our history that has positioned us on the map. And from this perspective, while up until this point, a lot of machinery has been kind of the only thing that determined if we were competitive enough or not, it might be that new technology that is not necessarily machinery can help us gain an advantage to other countries. So there are different domains that are either from our background that we should utilize, exactly as us as Fortech Investment, we're utilizing the domains that we worked in for a lot of time to be able to evaluate the startups, to help them, and so on. We should look the same as a country and maybe identify some domains that are right now or in the future are going to be the key elements that are going to make us attractive, and see if we can do something in that direction.